Welcome, everyone, to today's EMC's exclusive webinar, Progress Corticon, Changing the Rules of Business Rules. Today's session, you'll learn how Progress technology can differentiate your solutions from the competition, speed time to market, and slash risk. This is Marlis Furs, and I'm your host for today's session. David Bacanari Jr., OEM Global Account Executive, and Mark Allen, Vice President, CTO, Decision Management at Progress Software, are looking forward to presenting Progress technology exclusively to the EMC team. David Bacanari is the Global Account Executive on the Progress OEM Partner Team. David has been with Progress for over 15 years in various sales and product management roles, and currently works with leading software vendors to help with the challenges of connecting applications to data. Mark Allen is one of the leading authorities on business rules management. He began working with business rules software in the mid-1990s, building systems that help healthcare workers make better patient care decisions. In 2000, after years of working around shortcomings of existing technologies, he founded Corticon to deliver a business rules platform that could scale to handle the most sophisticated decision-making problems. Under his leadership as CEO, Corticon became a leading business rules platform in healthcare and diverse industries such as financial services, government, manufacturing, and insurance. Since the acquisition by Progress Software in late 2011, Dr. Allen has been a CTO helping to evangelize the benefits of Corticon across the world. Now I would like to hand today's presentation over to David Bacanari Jr. to kick us off. Welcome, David.
Hey, Marlis. This is David. I want to say thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. As Marlis said, I'm on the OEM account team here at Progress, and together myself and Sherry Bullock, who you may also know, we team up and we work with EMC and all the related companies such as RSA and Pivotal and VMware around use of the Progress products. So the first slide here, just as a really quick summary, I'd like to, for those of you that don't know Progress, just give you a quick intro and explain how we work with EMC today. We've really had a long-standing relationship over 10 years now with various divisions of EMC. The Doc Sciences expression product has embedded our XML data integration products for many years, and that's for translating EDI-type data streams into XML. RSA Security Analytics actually embeds the Progress DataDirect ODBC and JDBC drivers for collecting data from customers' databases and storing them on the appliance. And then Pivotal's big data platform standardizes on DataDirect ODBC and JDBC drivers. We do all the connectivity for Pivotal into Greenplum as well as the Hawk SQL engine on Hadoop. And then lastly, we've done a lot with EMC over the years under a resale arrangement where we've gone to market together around xCP and Documentum using the Corticon product that we're going to talk about today. So that's just a quick snapshot of where we've worked together in the past. Just a real quick note on Progress. We've been around for 30-plus years. We're actually headquartered in Bedford, Massachusetts, outside of Boston. And we've got a very large global footprint as well as offices all around the world to support these customers. A big piece of the business for us, though, is partnering with other software vendors like EMC. And that's a big part of our revenues at Progress and a big part of the direction that we expect to continue to go. Quick snapshot of some of the different verticals that we work with for software partners. It's really anyone from some of the smaller startup companies all the way to the EMCs, the Oracles, the SAPs. All these companies have leveraged Progress technology in commercial apps that they're building. And then since a lot of our relationship with EMC and Pivotal and RSA, I mentioned, was around the DataDirect products, I just wanted to have one slide to introduce you onto what DataDirect delivers, and then we'll focus on the Corticon and the business rules management for the rest of the session. So quickly, DataDirect provides EMC with standards-based ODBC, JDBC, and ADO.NET access to all sorts of customer data. And we really see that in three different buckets. Traditionally, DataDirect's been providing support for all types of relational data for 20 years now, so the Oracles, the DB2s, Sybase, etc. In the last 5 years, though, there's been a big focus on going after two other categories of data, and certainly the work that we've done with Pivotal and originally Greenplum for that big data platform, as well as other Hive platforms, MongoDB, Cassandra, some of the new things out there. All types of big data and NoSQL sources are definitely a focus for DataDirect now in providing simple access. And lastly, really going after SaaS cloud applications and putting a SQL standards ODBC or JDBC front end in front of a cloud app to make it simple for you guys to access things like Salesforce, Eloqua, Microsoft Dynamics, HubSpot, etc. So look for this list to just continue to grow over the next few years, and we hope we can work with more divisions of EMC. All right, so I am done with my part, and we're going to turn it over to Mark now.
Great. Thanks very much. Mark, you have the ball.
Okay. Thank you, David and Marlies. So here's the agenda for the Corticon section. Going to introduce everyone to business rules management, why we exist as a product line, and talk about our customer success, some cases that hopefully are relevant to you. Talk about what makes Corticon different, actually show you the product, and then get into some details of the Corticon-xCP integration that we've built between these two products. And then we'll open it up to questions at the end. So business rules management helps make the right decision at the right time, helps to automate those decisions, but automate them with agility, with the ability to allow the business to change the logic governing those decisions. So what do I mean by decisions? Here are some examples. Should we pay this claim? If so, how much? Can we recover money from other parties? What offer should we make to this customer right now based upon what they're doing on the screen, and perhaps based upon their prior purchase history? What resource should we allocate to this particular task? Who's available? Who has the skills to do it? So the connection between decisions and business rules is simply that rules govern the decisions that we make. So using this example, should we pay this claim, there might be hundreds or thousands of individual business rules. So for example, reject a claim with an invalid billing code. And then there might be a table of 100 rules that define what an invalid billing code is. So a business rules management system is a piece of software used to externalize this type of logic from the rest of the application code and allow it to be represented and managed as business rules that are friendly and understandable to business people. So you still have the system of record, say the claims management system built on xCP, and passes a document out to a business rules management system at the point in flow that you need to make a decision. The business rules management system, also known as a rules engine, will process its rules against the data in that document and send back a result, and in addition, send back an audit trail of exactly what rules fired in what order. So why did we build Corticon? Why did we create this product line, this initially as a company? The reason is that it's very difficult to automate this type of decision-making logic, and the more rules you have, the more difficult this task becomes. Now, it's really easy to manage simple rules. You can either build parameter tables and allow them to be managed as part of the application, or our competitors provide a variety of different business templates to manage simple rules. But the problem is sophisticated rules, which have to be programmed into our system. And the big issue is that these rules interrelate with one another in complex ways. And rules need to be changed due to a variety of forces, some of them internal to the company, changes in policy, some of them external, like a regulatory change. And the more rules that we have in the system, the longer it takes to make these changes and to make these changes with quality. And it gets to the point where a simple change that can be described from one business person to another in a matter of minutes might take man-months to implement in our system. So this is why we built Corticon, to provide a better way to manage this type of change. So with Corticon, like any other rules engine, or like a service-oriented architecture where you're properly encapsulating services, you separate the decision-making logic from the rest of the application code. Now at that point, the differences start to accrue. So with Corticon, instead of only the simple rules being accessible to business people, even the most sophisticated rules are as well, as are the interrelationships of the rules. Now, we call this modeling rules with integrity, the ability to express the rules and understand their interrelationships. And we provide tools that are equally accessible to business people and IT people to manage these rules. Now, once the rules are defined, Corticon automatically generates high-performance executable services that are delivered to the applications using open standards. So xCP, for example, integrates Corticon rules as web services, sending SOAP messages with XML payloads. Alternatively, the exact same rules can be integrated as Java services or as .NET services. So last is the critical ability to be able to make safe changes, understand specifically what rules need to be changed, make those changes, understand the impact of those changes, and be able to redeploy in minutes rather than months. So let's talk about some customer success. So Corticon has over 500 enterprise customers in a variety of different verticals. I'm going to jump into a few of them here. First of all, I'll talk about some high-level use cases. So we see a lot of customers that do things in the sales and marketing process, applying for complex products, whether these be loans or insurance products or eligibility for various government services, being able to price those products, quote them, recommend them, different products, police the entire process. Also in the area of customer servicing, whether this be claims handling or whether it be things like help desk types of applications, a lot of things there. Manufacturing and supply chain also. For example, BP uses Corticon to do voyage planning of tankers and barges anywhere in the world. Have other customers that have built production planning systems using Corticon. And last, what we call enterprise rules management. So typically a customer will start using Corticon for maybe a single decision point, but then they'll see this as just a better way to manage decision-making logic, both from an IT perspective as well as from a business perspective. From an IT perspective, our enterprise customers start to define architectural requirements. If there are more than a couple of conditions, then rather than code the rules, put them in Corticon because we know they're going to be subject to change. Or from a business perspective, rather than encoding our rules in a way that we can no longer read them and they're no longer transparent to the business, or have them in the heads of our people who might walk out the door with them and go to a competitor, instead have them as enterprise assets, transparent to the business and changeable by the business. So let's dive into some use cases. So this first one is an example of online insurance sales. This came from a customer that was selling individual health insurance, so health insurance directly to individuals, and selling it through a network of brokers. So in their case, the brokers would manage all the interaction with the customer, help them with their paper-based applications, and then pass it back to headquarters that would underwrite it, provide quotes on various products. The broker would recommend what products. They'd close the sale, and then they'd mail the customer some policy documents. So lots of opportunities to use Corticon. Now this customer wanted to open up in new geographies where they didn't currently have brokers. And they decided instead of going through brokers, they were going to build a web-based self-service application. So they duplicated this process effectively as a self-service. So the first place they use Corticon is in the application process. They use rules to determine what questions to ask based upon the answers to other questions. So a very simple example is they would only ask the question if somebody is pregnant if they're female and of a certain age. And they'll only ask female pregnancy questions if somebody is pregnant. So in doing this, they're able to really streamline the application process and ask the fewest questions to the healthiest applicants who are the most profitable and they want to be able to close as quickly as possible. So second, this whole underwriting, quoting, and recommending. So this is where there's literally thousands of rules, a lot of it based upon statistical science, where actuaries are analyzing claims data from third parties as well as from their own company to determine how to underwrite and how to price. And last, the generation of policy documents. So instead of sending one policy document to every single customer that is 30 pages long that explains every possible product. If you bought this product, this applies to you. If you're in this jurisdiction, this rule applies to you. Instead, they generate a unique policy document as a PDF specific to each customer. So all of this was built on just a combination of Corticon and a simple Java framework that was open source. So after filling out an online form, this is what came back. This is what it looked like. So it actually quoted 3 different products to the customer. It generated a PDF of the policy document that the customer could view. And this lady up here was actually a video that would describe why one of these products was better for you than any other. Now, lots of benefits here. So they were able to open up a new revenue channel very quickly. They were able to streamline a process that took 14 days from the time that they got a completed application to the time it closed to as little as 10 minutes for the healthiest applicants to take their credit card information. And last, they were able to rapidly respond to changes in market direction. When they wanted to add, for example, a new insurance product or change a product, it literally would take minutes or hours to do this as opposed to months. So next is an example of a long-running process that uses BPM. To be clear, Corticon does not offer BPM or workflow. This is what is part of the xCP solution. But this shows how the products work in combination. So this is a case that actually came from the State of Texas Department of Insurance doing workers' compensation claims adjudication. So they had a manual process with 21 manual steps. So steps like I described before. So what type of claim is it? For its type of claim, do we have all the data and is it valid? What is the jurisdiction that this is? How much should we reserve based upon its jurisdiction and expect in total claims costs for legal expenses, for medical expenses, things like that. While they're using BPM, okay, to manage the automation of the flow of work, okay, the document from person to person, and be able to track how long it takes people and queue it into their inbox, still most of the activities are still being done manually. So all those decision-making activities are still being done manually when we got there. So when you looked at the people that performing these tasks, they had big policy manuals by their desk, Post-it notes all over their monitor. So what we did with Corticon is we began to automate these steps one at a time. We asked the question, how do you make this decision? We captured the logic of that decision, and a lot of times that was already documented in the policy manual, and we turned it into an automated decision service. And using the BPM tool, rather than routing to a workflow step and providing visualization for a human to do that work, instead we routed the same work to an automated decision service and allowed Corticon to automate that work. We were able to automate the majority of steps in this process. So there still was manual processing, but it was mostly exception-based. For example, the rules would determine whether the claim is likely to be fraudulent. If so, the workflow engine would route it to a special investigator who might go and do a site visit, and it would tell them exactly what Corticon found and what they should investigate. So again, very similar benefits. We were able to accelerate service delivery, improve the quality for the customer, reduce the costs that actually tied to, they could prove that there was less cost to pay out the claims, and improve the agility, very quick and easy to make changes to this process. So eBay is another customer, and I want to mention them because this shows the scalability of Corticon. So eBay uses Corticon to address a problem of trust in their marketplace. So they were having problems where sometimes the buyers were unhappy with the way that a product was represented. They'd get it, be unhappy with it. So to really compete, eBay put in place this eBay buyer's guarantee. We'll guarantee you're happy. When they first put it in place, it was significantly impacting their profitability. They were spending a lot of money on refunds. So they said, we need to push this risk out onto the sellers. So they defined a set of policies that said that we're going to hold escrow from the sellers, money from the sellers, based upon a variety of criteria, based upon how new that seller is, what their ratings are, if they've had problems in the past, what products they're selling, and what geographies where they've had problems before. So you can imagine these rules are constantly growing. And the rules fire every time that there's a new listing and every time that a deal closes on eBay, as well as to analyze when the release conditions have been met to release funds. So 150 to 200 million transactions per day, and they're constantly adding more sophisticated rules. So there's a lot of scalability. And we also like this one because prior to using Corticon here, they were using our largest competitor, IBM iLog's product, to look at their listings for fraud. And they had decided not to use iLog for this new application because as you got to more and more rules in iLog, the time to add a new rule would grow exponentially, and they were having very difficult, challenging performance problems. So next one, Meridian Health Plan. So Corticon's done a ton of work in the area of implementation of affordable health care, Affordable Care Act, as well as lots of other benefits services. This happens to be a customer that was already using Progress's Open Edge application development environment and needed to adhere to the regulations in Obamacare and added Corticon to be able to address this. In addition to this, Corticon is the #1 rules engine for various types of health and human service applications. So actually we're now at 20 customers, having just added Kansas very recently, that use Corticon. I think our next largest competitor has 5 customers. And a lot of those things are eligibility systems and then claim systems for handling Medicaid, electronic prescription systems, lots of different kinds of applications. Unum is a enterprise customer of Corticon. They're the nation's largest employee benefits provider, providing disability insurance, life insurance, and other employee benefits. They use Corticon all over the place, but here's a couple of great quotes that show the impact. So before using Corticon, it could take 8 weeks to get a price quote out to one of their larger employer customers. And now with Corticon, it takes as little as a week. And from an IT perspective, changes that would have taken weeks can now be made in days with all of the necessary IT governance and control. So DBS, one of the largest banks in Singapore, uses Corticon for all their credit scoring models for various types of lending processes. So both secured and unsecured loans, and they have different models for different geographies and different types of loans. The really cool thing is the business benefits here. So before using Corticon, they had an audit from the Singapore Ministry of Finance, and they basically couldn't effectively describe and show what their credit decisioning process is. And because of that, they were required to hold a much higher level of reserves. And then they implemented this solution in Corticon. They brought the regulators back in and showed them all the rules in Corticon, which then allowed them to manage their money much more effectively, reduce those reserves. So let's talk about the differentiation. So Corticon's recognized as a leader in the market. We're also recognized as breakthrough, big word for the analyst to use. So Forrester noted that we're breakthrough in terms of our tools for business analysts. We'll get into this, but basically the point that I made before, so everybody can do simple rules for business people. Only Corticon can do sophisticated rules that business people can manage and control. And IDC went a bit deeper, diving into this issue of how Corticon manages integrity in your rule base and how Corticon has solved some of the performance and scalability issues. So these tie very directly to our points of differentiation. So first is model-driven development, the ability to automate all of the rules in a business-friendly form without coding. Number two is guaranteed rules integrity, the ability to ensure safe changes to your rule base. And number three is our DD engine, which is the market best performance and scalability. So diving into these a bit, so Corticon uses a metaphor called the decision table, very similar to a spreadsheet. Now, we didn't invent this metaphor. It's found on clay tablets from the time of Jesus. What we invented is a way to extend this metaphor to make it comprehensive, to be able to express any rule that a business might want to express, and to be able to use it as a way to highlight the interrelationships of those rules. And we have patents on those capabilities. So lots of people have decision tables as a metaphor to represent simple rules. Only Corticon can use decision tables to represent all rules. So I'm going to actually demo this to you and show you how this works. So to set up the demo, from the perspective of Corticon, you always start first from the perspective of the process. So you might use process modeling or an actual BPM tool to design some of your process builder. And you break down your process into a sequence of steps. And for each step, you identify, is a decision being made? And if so, it's a candidate for automation using Corticon. So in this process, we'll use that same process of a new insurance application. And each one of these is a decision-making step. So specifically, we'll pick this determine risk profile. And we ask the question, how do you make this decision? How do you determine the risk profile? As soon as you ask that question, you get business rules. Now, those business rules might be documented, as I mentioned, in the form of a policy manual. They might just be in the heads of the people that are managing this step in the process. Or they might be embedded in code if we've been automating this process. So we have to get at those rules to begin using Corticon Studio. So let's say in this case it's just being done manually, and we talk to the expert, and the expert says, oh, it's really easy. There's just two simple rules. So what we're going to do is we're going to take those rules and put them into Corticon Studio. So I'm going to share my desktop to move over to Corticon Studio. To orient you to the product, down here in the rule statement section is the informal expression of the rule as the business wants to state it. So this could be in any language even, and no formality to this description here. Up here is where we implement or model the formal expression. We do that by putting the conditions of the rules in this section, the actions of the rules in this section, and we tie together the conditions and the actions with each column. Now, in order to model our rules, we need what's over here, what we call the vocabulary. The vocabulary are simply the terms that are referenced in our rule statements. So things like applicants that have age values and skydiver values and relate to one or more policies. So how do you get the vocabulary? Well, you can either build it from scratch using Corticon Studio, or if you've got an existing vocabulary, existing data model, you can import it. So you can import in, for example, the process builder data model or your application data model. When you import it in, you can translate the terms to business-friendly terms, and it hides all of the technical concepts like the methods or the join tables or things like this because it's meant to be business-friendly. So let's go ahead and model these rules. This first rule is saying, if an applicant's a skydiver, that's my condition, then as an action, assign high to risk rating. So I come over here and I drag is skydiver as my first condition, and I say if skydiver is true, then assign to risk rating the value of high. This implements my first rule statement. Now I see that the two are tied together once I put in that reference number. So that was easy. Let's go ahead and do the second one. The second one's talking about applicants less than 35. So I come over here and I drag age, and I say for my condition here, if age is less than 35, then assign low to risk rating. This implements my second rule statement. So great, I just finished implementing the logic of both of my rules. So I'm going to go ahead and save this and test it. And testing, just like the expression of the rules is meant to be business friendly, I can come over here and drag and drop an example from my vocabulary, create a new example, or alternatively, if IT has hooked me up with a data source, I can test directly against that data source. So in this case, I'll just define a new scenario. I'm going to call this applicant Tom. Give Tom an age of 30 and make Tom not a skydiver. So again, let's go back and look at our rules to make sure we know what we're going to expect here. So if age is less than 30 and they're not a skydiver, they should be low risk. So let's go ahead and run this rule set. The first time we run it, it compiles the rules down to an executable, sends the data to the engine, and we get the result. So we see that we got a low risk rating, and if we click on this, we see the rule that fired, giving us an audit trail. Only one rule. Okay, so that worked great. Let's go ahead and copy this data and make a couple of additional scenarios. So the first one is Tom, is age less than 35. The second one we'll call Dick, and we'll make Dick a skydiver. So applicants who skydive should get a high risk rating. And the last one we'll make Harry, and Harry will make an old guy and see what happens. So now we'll run all three simultaneously. So no change to Tom, but look at Dick. Dick's a skydiver, but he's low risk. What happened? Well, if I click on the applicant and I look at the audit trail, I see that both rules fired. So first, he matched for skydiver, and he was assigned a high risk. Then he was matched for less than 35 and was assigned a low risk. Was this the intent of the business? Probably not. What this illustrates is not a problem with rule engines, but a problem in the specification itself. Under this particular scenario, we didn't define what to do if both rules match and the rules conflict. So while testing in Corticon is really business friendly and a really cool tool, testing is the wrong place to identify logical errors. Why? Because as your rules grow in complexity, as there's more and more criteria that the rules reference, the number of test cases it would take to test all rules grows to a point that it's an intractable problem to test every logical case. So in a moment, I'm going to show you a much better way. But first, let's look at this third applicant, Harry. Harry has no rating. What happened with Harry? Well, we have a rule that says if they're less than 35, we have a rule that says if they're a skydiver, but what if they don't match anything? Well, this is what we call a loophole in our policy. And I can tell you from working on this for well over a decade with some of the most respected government organizations, physician organizations that define clinical practice guidelines, some of the world's largest insurance companies, banks, invariably their policy documents are incomplete and ambiguous, have loopholes in them, have conflict in them, sometimes have circular logic in them. To automate that kind of logic, you've got to get that right. Okay, so Corticon's going to help you. So before I show you that, let's move these over to the expectant. Let's define what we would expect under these scenarios. So let's suppose if they're a skydiver, independent of anything else, they should be high risk. And if they're old but not a skydiver, we should call them medium risk. So now if I run these rules, Studio actually highlights the variance in red, tells me what the problem is. Now, this is really helpful both for visualization of the problem, but you can also run all these test cases automatically as regression tests, and it will highlight against the file itself whether there's a problem, and then you can open up just the ones with variance. So it really helps you to test changes to your rules much more easily. So now let's go back to our rule sheet here. So looking at this rule sheet view, this first rule is saying if the applicant's a skydiver, the dash means I don't care about age, they're high risk. But if I double click this, Studio is smart enough to know that this is skydiver, less than 35, or greater than or equal to 35 is high risk. So likewise, for age less than 35, skydiver or not, they're low risk. So now that I've shown you this, let me show you these analysis features. So I'm going to collapse down those rules. And first, I'm going to do this check for conflicts. So I click on this, and Studio says, hey, you've got a problem. But if I expand these rules out, Studio shows me that under the precise scenario of a skydiver, less than 35, that's where your problem is. You're calling it both high and low risk. What do you want to do in this case? So now it's been pointed out in a way that business can understand it, they can address it. And so like we defined in our expected results, let's say that under the conflicting case, Rule 1 should override Rule 2. So now if we check for conflicts, there are none. Okay, that was easy. Let's go ahead and do this second one. Check for completeness. I click on this, and Studio comes back and says, hey, you forgot about the case when somebody's not a skydiver and older than 35. What do you want to do? So again, like we defined, we'll call this medium risk. We'll put in a third rule. We'll post it as an informational message specifically to the applicant record for our audit trail. For the sake of time, we'll call this medium risk, but we would type out the full rule statement typically. And now we have this matched to this column. So last is check for logical loops, circular logic. This is a very simple rule set. There's no circular logic here. So now I'm going to save this set of rules. I'm going to go back to my test scenario and run the new rules through the same data, same data through the new rules, and I see here no change in applicant 1. Applicant 2 has the right risk rating and only the appropriate rule fired. The other one was overridden. And applicant 3 now has a risk rating, and everything matches my expected perfectly. So I've just shown you 80% of Corticon. So from here, it just scales with regards to complexity. So I'm going to open up a real-world case here. So as your problem gets more complex, you may want to break the problem into multiple rule sheets that we then combine at the end. So in this case, this is actually, again, a portion of a problem from a real-world customer, again, determining risk. So they broke it into actually much more than this, components, but at the very last rule sheet simply combines the results of the prior rule sheets to determine a final risk class. Now, this isn't that interesting, but what's much more interesting is if I double-click this medical history risk, I see here that there are about 20 conditions used across these rules. This was represented by the customer. It was actually, the customer was doing manual underwriting when we got there and had about 20 pages of a policy manual that we now were able to represent in this simple rule sheet. So we used a feature of the product called compress rules that compressed many rules down to a few number of simple rules that had dashes or ranges to represent them. Okay. We also had identified for the customer that there were conflicts across their rules. When we showed this to the customer, they said, oh, that's easy. If they qualify for Preferred Plus, that should override everything else. But the funny thing is that wasn't written down in their policy manual. So last, we used this check for completeness function. We clicked on this, and an interesting result came out. Completeness check added almost 5 million missing scenarios. So 5 million combinations of data that they had failed to address. Now, Corticon Studio compresses that 5 million into the most efficient sets of the population, got it down to 11. For example, this particular rule says cholesterol level greater than 280. Forgetting everything else, what do they qualify for? And the customer came back and said, oh, well, they don't qualify under that particular case, except for if they were an existing customer, in which case they qualify at the standard level. So we had to add another condition here to check whether they're an existing customer and override this rule with that exception. So you see how very quickly you can take a problem of really any variable complexity and very quickly solve and address it. So now I've just shown you really the majority of the functionality of Corticon. So let's go ahead back to our slide deck, talk a little bit more about the differentiation. So now that I've shown you the model-driven approach, let's talk about how this compares to a traditional approach at managing rules. So in a traditional approach, the business specifies the rules, and then we have IT folks design what needs to be coded, what can go into business templates. They code. The business will input the rules into their templates. It has to be tested by IT, at least build out the application to be able to run the rules in parallel, and we integrate and deploy. So with Corticon, we're able to compress a lot of this down to what we call modeling, what I just showed you. So we see typically a 10-time reduction in initial development, a 25 times reduction in change cycles with higher quality logic and higher performance execution. So looking at this in more detail, we did a study with the NCAA who uses Corticon to determine eligibility for athletics based on a variety of criteria, the most complex of which is academic criteria, where they actually look at the school you came from and the different courses and your transcript against those courses, all of which are scored differently, quite complex. And they moved from a first-generation technology where they just couldn't effectively manage the change cycles over to Corticon and found a 10-time reduction in initial development on somebody, comparing somebody who was sophisticated and trained in a long time working in the competitive product and just trained in Corticon. And then a change cycle, they actually had to make a change before they had moved over to Corticon. It took 50 hours in the old technology, 2 hours to make the same change in Corticon. So let's talk about this rules integrity that you saw. So these checks that assure that we get the logic errors out up front. Now this diagram comes from standard software engineering methodology. Now we know very well that the longer that it takes down the development cycle to identify an error, the more costly it is to fix that error, and it grows exponentially. Furthermore, we know that most errors are introduced in bad requirements, but they're not found until we go out to user acceptance testing. Just like I showed you, if it's a bad requirement and the programmer programs that requirement perfectly without any errors, okay, we're not going to find that error until we go to user acceptance testing. And God forbid that we don't find it until production. It could be very costly. So Corticon helps you to identify those errors up front. Okay, how does this compare to our competitors? Our competitors, you're lucky to find those errors. Your rules are represented, some in a technical language, some in a business language. So you have to put them in a common form to even understand them, or you have to go out to user acceptance testing to be able to understand them. So very, very complex debugging procedures. So next is engine performance. So to solve complex decision-making problems requires inferencing, the ability to chain rules together, and chain them together not manually but in an automated way. That's really a power of a sophisticated rules engine. So the most common algorithm that used by our competitors for chaining rules is called the Reedy algorithm. It scales very well with increasing numbers of rules, but it scales very poorly with increasing amounts of data. And everybody knows the amount of data that's available to us for decision making just continues to grow and grow and grow. So the problem with our competitors is you get to a certain point in the data, because it degrades exponentially, all of a sudden you go from sub-second response to the thing takes a minute to respond. Effectively is not responding. So with Corticon, we scale linearly with the size of the payload. So unique patented differentiation that allows us to handle much more sophisticated problems. And this becomes especially troubling, a customer like an eBay or a lot of our customers that we have well over a dozen customers that have migrated from iLog and from Fair Isaac to Corticon, where they've just, down the road, initially their performance was fine, but down the road as they added complexity, they just couldn't perform anymore. So this is actually one of the reasons why Progress bought Corticon. So Progress was trying to use the open source JBoss Drools engine from Red Hat in one of its products. Worked fine in their labs, in their engineering, and spent gobs of money building it into their products. But when they went out to real-world customers that had real-world sophistication, the thing just couldn't scale. So they moved over to Corticon, which could scale very effectively. So let's talk about the Corticon-xCP integration. We've done a lot of work on this together. The products are integrated using web service invocation from Process Builder, effectively calling out Corticon as steps in the process. We've built several assets that describe this integration. So I'd say the best one is the grants management sample application. It uses rules in Corticon to assign priority and risk, invalidate and classify the grant process, and provides great documentation of how to call Corticon and how to map the data using the mapping tool and not writing code. So very, very effective integration. There's also in the investigative case management accelerator, uses Corticon for screening rules to determine whether an incident is a crime that needs to be investigated. And last, there is a kind of general purpose horizontal Corticon accelerator, and this is used to manipulate Corticon rules directly from task space without having to go into the Corticon Studio rule editor that I showed you. So the issue with Corticon Studio, while it's easy to learn, it is a 3-day training course for those that have no programming experience. Those that have programming experience, it can be accelerated a bit, but it still requires training to use it. So you can also build rules that can be changed by people that don't know how to use Corticon Studio, just know how to use the end user interface and change those rules in task space. That's what that accelerator defines. Okay, with that, I just want to summarize. Corticon is a super easy product to learn how to use. Everything that I showed you, you can download the product, install it in 5 minutes. It's got great documentation. There are tutorials associated with the product. There's also, for our partners, we make available web-based training and can also arrange live training as well. So in summary, lots of benefits to your clients that they can realize, and also lots of IT benefits in terms of faster development and change cycles and ensuring performance and scalability and empowering the business users. So with that, I wanted to provide my contact information here, open it up to questions as well.
And at this point, if we have any questions, you can enter those in the chat box. There is a quick question regarding xCP 2.1. If we are using standard web services, this won't be a problem. Is that correct?
Yeah,
with the newer, he means with the newer version of xCP.
Yes. So the same integration as defined in the grants management application should work. So we support all of the same interfaces at Corticon, and I'm sure that the same web services integration, which was basically built. Corticon was one of the points of integration that web services integration was built on at EMC. So we have a current customer, the Central Bank of Nigeria, that's using xCP 2.0 with Corticon, and I haven't seen the demo, but I'm sure that it should work. And please contact us if there's any issue, because we'll work with you. But that brings up a separate point, which we really do need to upgrade some of these assets to xCP 2.0. So that's something that David and Sherry are working with you guys on.
Well, that's terrific. Well, thanks everybody for joining today's session, and you can log off.